Now listen closely, Emma, I said, settling deeper into my armchair as the firelight flickered like old memories. Because this beginning, was when everything started to change. And like many turning points in life, it didn't come with thunder or shouting. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary moment. Back then I was a different woman. I still believed that loyalty was something you gave with your entire heart, not realizing that some people only know how to accept, never how to return. I was younger, beautiful in that soft, hopeful way people are before they've learned whom to fear and whom to trust. And I loved my husband, Daniel, with a devotion that now seems almost naive. It was 3 days before Christmas, a snowy Wednesday afternoon. I stood in the kitchen icing gingerbread cookies, humming along to an old holiday tune, the sort of cozy, peaceful moment I cherished. The entire house smelled of cinnamon and warmth, and for a brief second I felt content. Then Daniel walked in. He always had this way of entering a room like he expected applause. Shoulders back, tie perfectly straight, a smile rehearsed to perfection. People adored him. They thought he was charming, generous, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and helped elderly neighbors carry groceries. And that was all true until it wasn't. That day he leaned against the counter, hands in his pockets, and said it so casually he might as well have asked me to pass the salt. "My ex is coming to Christmas dinner." The icing bag trembled in my hand, though just for a second. If you blinked you'd have missed it. I kept my eyes on the cookie in front of me, finishing the last swirl of frosting before I looked up. "Elena?" I asked. He nodded, smiling like a boy proud of a school project. "Yes. She's in town visiting her aunt. She doesn't really have anywhere else to go for Christmas. I thought it would be nice." Nice. How people use pretty words to hide ugly intentions. I felt a faint tightening in my chest. Not jealousy, no. It was the quiet alarm bell of a woman whose instincts had finally woken up after years of trusting too easily. The sort of feeling that says, something isn't right here. Pay attention. But I didn't let any of that reach my face. The trick, you see, was to remain exactly as he expected me to be, warm, agreeable, accommodating. The perfect wife. So I smiled, placing the cookie gently on the tray. "Of course," I said. "The more the merrier." He kissed my cheek, thanked me, and left the kitchen humming. A man who believed he had gotten his way without consequence. But what Daniel didn't know, what he still believed at that point, was that I was clueless. That I had not seen the late-night messages under a fake contact name. That I had not read the emotional confessions, the reminiscing, the subtle flirting he thought was harmless. But I had. I had read every word. I discovered them the night before, when his phone buzzed at 1:14 a.m. while he slept beside me. He forgot to mute notifications, that was his mistake. And when I saw the name, Carl from accounting, I almost laughed. Daniel didn't know a single Carl. One swipe, one tap, and my world shifted. There she was. Elena. His ex. And then, like a twist in a story too dramatic to be real, I learned something else while scrolling through her social media. She was engaged. To a man named Lucas. A man Daniel didn't know existed. And suddenly everything became clear. The truth. The betrayal. The irony. So when I smiled at Daniel that day and agreed to let his ex join us for Christmas dinner, my heart wasn't breaking. It was planning. Because I had already sent one more invitation. To Elena's unsuspecting fiancé. "Grandma," Emma whispered, eyes wide. "You weren't scared." "Scared?" I laughed softly. "Oh no, sweetheart. That was the first moment in my life I realized something powerful. Revenge doesn't need rage. It needs clarity." And with that, chapter 1 came to a close. "Now, Emma," I said as I smoothed the blanket across my lap, "chapter 2 is where the calm became more dangerous than any storm. Because sometimes silence is not peace, it's preparation." After Daniel announced Elena's visit, the house felt different. Not visibly, not in a way an outsider could notice. But inside me something had shifted. I moved through the rooms as if I were placing pieces on a chessboard. Quiet, deliberate, purposeful. The first morning after his announcement, I woke early. Snow clung to the windows, frosting the glass like delicate lace. I stood there for a moment, in the stillness before dawn, letting myself feel everything I hadn't shown the night before. Hurt. Disappointment. And under it all, a strange, steady clarity. "You'd expect I was furious," I told Emma. But I wasn't. Anger is loud, and I felt something quieter. Something sharper. It was as if my heart had stepped outside itself, examining the situation like a surgeon inspecting an injury. I realized I had a choice. Confront Daniel and fall apart, or hold my dignity like a sword and let the truth reveal itself naturally. And oh, how beautifully truth reveals itself when you stop shielding the guilty. So I started preparing the house for Christmas dinner. Outwardly, it looked like ordinary holiday enthusiasm. Inwardly, every action had purpose. I polished the silverware until it shone so brightly that if anyone looked closely, they could see their reflection, and perhaps their flaws. I set out my best dishes, the ones with little gold leaves along the edges. Daniel always said they were too fancy for everyday use. But this dinner wasn't everyday. This dinner would be historic. As I moved around the house, I kept replaying the text messages I'd seen. The way Daniel spoke to Elena, like she was a secret he'd never really let go of. The just checking in excuses. The late-night confessions about how he missed their talks. But the message that truly sealed my resolve was one she sent him. I haven't told Lucas about us talking again. He's so busy planning the wedding. He wouldn't understand. That one sentence held enough betrayal to power a small city. It's funny, I told Emma, how betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes wrapped in sweet words and smiley emojis. While polishing the dining table, I picked up my phone and typed the message to Elena's fiancé. Simple, polite, and honest. I'm hosting Christmas dinner. I'd love for you and Elena to join us as a couple. After all, it would be wonderful to celebrate your engagement. I hit send. No trembling. No regret. In the following days, Daniel was in an unusually good mood. He hummed while shaving. He complimented my cooking. He held my waist in the kitchen as if trying to remind me of old affection. Perhaps guilt made him sweeter. Or maybe he believed he was getting away with everything. But each time he wrapped his arms around me, I felt nothing. Not coldness, not yet, but a certainty that whatever warmth we once had was melting slowly, like snow under a harsh sun. The night before Christmas Eve, I laid out the seating arrangement. Daniel would sit at the head of the table as always, Elena beside him, and directly across from her, her fiancé Lucas. A perfect triangle. Perfect stage. I lit a candle and watched the flame dance, thinking about what would unfold. Not chaos. Not vengeance in the traditional sense. Something more elegant. You see, I said to Emma, I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted the truth to stand in the center of the room. Because truth, my darling, is the most powerful force on earth. It doesn't destroy the innocent. It destroys lies. When I finally went to bed that night, Daniel wrapped an arm around me, whispering good night. I stared at the ceiling, calm, composed, already accepting how the next day would end. Because I wasn't planning a dinner. I was preparing a revelation. Ah, Emma, I said, settling into my chair as the fire flickered. Chapter 3 is where the storm finally arrived, but it didn't roar. It crept in quietly and then it cut like ice. Christmas Eve was crisp and still. Snow coated the streets outside like powdered sugar. Inside, the house smelled of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and pine. I had spent hours arranging every detail, every ornament, every flickering candle, to make the room feel warm, festive, and ordinary. So ordinary that nobody would suspect the truth waiting beneath the surface. I wore a red dress that hugged me in just the right way. Not to impress Daniel, mind you, but to give myself confidence. A calm strength that he would never recognize until it was too late. My hair glimmered in soft waves, and I had polished my nails, though the world wouldn't need to see them. This was a dinner of revelation, not fashion. Daniel was in the kitchen, fumbling with his tie and trying too hard to smile. He thought he was charming everyone as usual. He didn't know what was coming. And then the knock at the door. He opened it, grinning, expecting only Elena. Only her familiar face. Only the past he thought he could control. But reality had other plans. Elena stepped in first, radiant and composed, as if she owned every room she entered. But beside her walked a man who towered over both of us, confident, kind-eyed, and unmistakably present. Lucas, her fiancé. Daniel froze. Froze. Like a deer caught in the headlights of a car he didn't see coming. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost theatrical. His carefully rehearsed composure shattered in a single second. "Oh," he stammered, the single word failing to contain his shock. You brought someone?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice steady, but her eyes wide with confusion. "This is Lucas. I wanted you both to meet." I stepped forward, smiling as if the world had not shifted beneath my feet. "Welcome. We're so glad you could join us," I said softly. Glad. Yes, but it tasted like honey laced with fire. Dinner began in tense silence. Daniel fidgeted with his napkin. Elena kept her gaze down, careful not to provoke him. Lucas, oblivious to the storm, chatted about wedding plans and holiday preparations, his voice warm and steady. Then casually Lucas asked, "Elena told me she bumped into an old friend recently, Daniel, right? She said he reached out again." Elena's fork froze midair. Daniel's face paled further, his jaw tightening. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the picture of calm. I didn't need to say a word. Silence had already become my ally. "Lucas," Elena whispered. It wasn't anything." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. He realized in that instant that the little white lies he had nurtured for months were no longer hidden. And then I slid across the table a neatly printed stack of his messages, proof of every secret conversation, every emotional confession. "I believe this belongs to all of you," I said quietly, letting the words settle in the space between us. The room erupted, not with yelling, not with anger, but with disbelief, confusion, and hurt so sharp it could have cut steel. Lucas stood, towering over Daniel. "You were still messaging her behind both our backs?" His voice was calm but deadly, like ice forming over boiling water. Elena's eyes welled with tears. "Daniel, why?" she asked, voice trembling. "We're supposed to be moving on. I'm engaged. I trusted you." Daniel stammered, searching for excuses, for words that could undo the truth, but none came. His calm, charming persona had disintegrated completely. I watched him, the man who had once seemed invincible, shrinking under the weight of honesty. And I felt nothing but quiet satisfaction. This was not cruelty. It was inevitability. By the time dessert arrived, Daniel sat slumped in his chair, defeated. Elena's arm slipped into Lucas's as they prepared to leave, both shaken but moving forward together. And there I sat, sipping my tea, the woman who had once been naive, now entirely unbroken. Emma leaned closer, whispering, "Grandma, did you enjoy it?" I smiled softly. "Not enjoyment, darling. Justice. There's a difference. And sometimes the quietest justice is the most beautiful of all." "Now, Emma," I said, drawing a deep breath as I leaned back. "This is the chapter where everything finally fell into place. Not in a way that made me laugh or dance, but in a way that gave me something far more precious, freedom." After the dinner, the house felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet in that hollow, tense way when everyone has witnessed the collapse of a carefully built illusion. Daniel sat at the table, hunched over, staring at the scattered messages and the empty wine glasses. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For years he had worn charm like armor. It had protected him from suspicion, from anger, from consequences. But now, stripped bare, he was utterly defenseless. "You ruined me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Everything I've built. You ruined it." I shook my head gently, my voice calm, even tender. "No, Daniel," I said. "You ruined yourself. I simply allowed truth to stand in the room. That's all. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading for something that no longer existed. Forgiveness, control, reassurance. But I had already crossed the line from innocence into clarity. There was nothing left for him in me but the truth. Elena had already left with Lucas, leaving behind only the scent of perfume and heartbreak. The door shut with a finality that resonated in every corner of the house. I watched Daniel's shoulders slump further, realizing that his carefully constructed world, the one where he could manipulate emotions and hide his betrayals, had collapsed entirely. I served myself dessert. Simple pecan pie, golden and warm. I ate slowly, deliberately, savoring the taste of cinnamon and caramel, letting each bite remind me that life still held sweetness even after betrayal. Daniel stared at me from across the table, his mind scrambling for an explanation, an apology, a way to rewind time. But there was none. That night, after the guests had left and the snow settled quietly outside, I walked through the house. Every ornament, every candle, every carefully polished plate now held a different meaning. They were not just decorations, they were witnesses. Witnesses to a woman who had been hurt, yes, but had chosen to reclaim her dignity rather than crumble. The following days were filled with silence between Daniel and me. He tried at first to charm me back. He offered explanations. He begged for a second chance. But I had learned something vital that Christmas. Nothing he could say would undo what had been revealed. Lies once exposed cannot be unspoken. Trust once broken cannot be fully restored. And so I made my decision. 3 weeks later I left. I didn't slam doors. I didn't yell. I simply packed my things and walked out, carrying only my belongings, my heart, and the lessons I had learned. I left behind a man who had thought he could play with emotions without consequence, and in doing so I left behind my past mistakes, the ones that had allowed me to believe loyalty alone could protect me. Life afterward was quieter, yes, but also richer. I learned to trust myself above all else. I learned that freedom is sweeter than revenge, and that dignity is more powerful than any act of retribution. Daniel faded into the background of my life, a memory of what I survived, not what I mourned. I turned to Emma, her little hand still clutching mine. "Darling," I whispered. "Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons. Betrayal hurts, yes, but it also reveals the strength you never knew you had. And when the storm passes, if you are brave enough to stand, you will see the light on the other side." That's what Christmas taught me that year. She nodded, eyes wide with understanding, the firelight reflecting in them like tiny flickering stars. I pulled her close, hugging her tightly. "And remember, my dear," I said softly, "revenge doesn't need to be loud or cruel or messy. Sometimes it is just the quiet act of reclaiming your life, your joy, and your truth. That is the sweetest revenge of all." The fire crackled again, warmth spreading through the room. And in that moment I felt the young woman I once was, the one who stood calm, dignified, and strong amidst chaos, smile quietly from inside me. She had survived, she had won, and she would never forget.